Welcome back to another episode of Fantastic Descriptions. I'm Neil Aitken, and today we're going to continue our discussion of room descriptions. Last time we talked about first impressions. Today we're going to focus on context. We're going to answer, or at least think about how we answer in our description, the underlying question, where is this place? Where are we? So that, I think, really boils down to four different elements, and we're going to go into a little bit more detail, but a quick overview. One is its spatial relationship. Where is this room in relation to other things on this level or within this complex or within whatever the larger map is that we are imagining or we're referring to? So spatial relation. Number two, we might be considering function. So sometimes our description is going to relay an information about the function of this space. And that function, again, is in reference to the larger, if you think of sort of a dungeon or a complex or a castle or structure, whatever you're looking at, even a forest or a cave system, as an organism in which, or a large machine in which these things are the smaller components, there is a importance or a function to each of these spaces. So maybe this is a guard space. Maybe this is a, it's some sort of a bottleneck or a throttle place. Whatever it is, there is a function to the space, and that can be imparted and communicated in our description. Number three is to think about its historical context. So like sometimes the information we want to impart has to do with the antiquity of the space, or something that's recently happened to the space, or marks or signs of something that's happened in between its construction and now. So we'll revisit that, go into a little bit more detail. And finally, we think about sort of its context in relation to the plot, in relation to the narrative as it's unfolding at that very moment. So there are times in which what we want to communicate has to relate more to what the character's objectives are, or their immediate threats. And so then the context is really has to do with, this is where the goblin ran to, or this is the throne room that you've been seeking, or this is the access to the next part of the complex or the dungeon. Okay, so those are the four things: spatial relation, function, historical context, and narrative or plot context. So let's go to the first one, spatial relation. And that's really to say, like, if you're describing something, sometimes the most important thing you need to communicate is the fact that this space provides access to other spaces. So you might say, like, you emerge out of this hallway and find yourself in a throne room with 3 exits. And then what's important then is to kind of impart that information about where they are in relation to these other things. Maybe behind you is, or to the left, you hear the sound of, these things can help the players and the characters orient themselves within that larger complex. So if you have, and this goes back to sort of the discussion we had last time about sensory information and sort of the phenomenological experience, the sensory experience, the conscious experience of the character in that moment. Think about the sensory information they have. Think about what they know already and what they might be able to pick up with each room. So if you have a map of, let's say, your dungeon, your castle, whatever the complex is, and you know as a DM or a GM what's located in these other locations, you can decide what smells and sounds and sights might be perceivable, might be able to be accessed from, they bleed out of their space into the next space or into 2 spaces away. So that if you describe an entry into a space that's new, that they haven't been to before, but you know that's connected and not obstructed by, it's connected to an active blacksmith. And so there's the sounds of someone hammering that echo down the hallways, or you hear drumming. This is classic, is back to Lord of the Rings. You hear drumming in the deep that echoes all the way up. There's a sense that what you're talking about is not simply an isolated, divorced space, but one that's connected to an active, moving mechanism, machine, or organism. And often it's more like an organism that's going to react to their actions, and their entry, their exits, their combats are going to respond. And so that sense of it being placed within a larger context in which you can hear sounds, or you see the flashes of lights off in the distance, or you hear, or feel vibration in the wall as a large force moves towards you. You can't see them yet, but you can tell that something's coming. That's the type of excitement you can build with regards to spatial relationship. So spatial relationship, and I would say keep a sensory map out what encounters or environmental elements might produce sound, sight, or sound, visual effects, or smells that would carry far enough that people would be able to react to them. Okay, so that's spatial relations. Number 2, function. Sometimes what's important is that you communicate the function of the space, and it may simply be a shortcut. You may simply say, you open the door and it's another utility closet. It's another prison cell. It's sufficient, unless you need to call out something different. It's sufficient sometimes to simply call out the function and move on. Or you might give a slight, modification. You might say it's another drab prison cell, a musty library. You can play to the cliches, but I mean, basically let the players push the narrative, push the questions. If they have more interest, and say, like, what's in the library? We spend 20 minutes searching through the shelves to see what's there. Then you can unpack it a little bit more. But remember, it's really what happens quickly in that first glance. And so you don't have time to really communicate the exhaustive history of this library and who founded it. It's not important, which is a different question. We'll get to it a little bit later on. Okay, so function, sometimes it's simply good enough to know that. The other part of function might be to think about, what is the role that this room plays within the larger complex. So if you're talking a dungeon or castle, often rooms have, they have strategic value. So it might be, this is a choke point, and so you see that they have formed, you enter into a space, there's a makeshift barricade in the way that restricts movement down to a single file. That suggests that, the people who occupy the space understand the function of their space and are using it, and you can communicate some of that back to your players. Or the fact that the space could be used strategically. You might drop a hint or two about its elevation. You from this point, you find yourself on a balcony overlooking the ritual, the ritual room and the altar below. You see a congregation of dark cloaked figures dragging a goat to the center, or whatever it is, and so you have then you get the sense that you're perched high up. You get the sense that you have elevation and you're looking down. That spatial relationship is valuable, but also the function that this might be a good place to launch an attack. Maybe you find some place that seems like you want to communicate that it's perhaps a safe place to take refuge in. This little used utility closet or this storage room seems dusty and rarely visited, and that might be sufficient information for them to understand this has a function as a storage room, but its other function might be a place that we can fall back to because it doesn't seem like it's visited that often. Okay, number 3, historical context. Sometimes what you want to impart is a sense of the age, the antiquity of the space, because you want to emphasize what may or may not be here. So if you emphasize, for instance, that this is, this space seems undisturbed for the last 500 years, as might be, reflected by certain artwork that you see, the statuary, whatever it is, you give them little clues. You might suggest that they make a history check of some sort of knowledge check to figure out something like that, or leave it unprompted and let them figure it out on their own. I personally sometimes will ask for those checks just so that I have an excuse to kind of give them a little bit more information. And other times I might just let it slide, and it just feels ancient, that this is probably the oldest part of the castle you've encountered so far. The brickwork and the stone masonry work suggests something that predates the other elements. Or the stones descend into a much older area, which seems rough-hewn, carved out of the natural rock below. So you can do things like that kind of suggest like a gradation, a change in time. Maybe the stone work is ancient, but the doors are new, and that type of, someone's been in here, someone's been changing things around. There is a sense of ownership. There is a sense of transition of power or something. Whatever is happening, you can do a little detective work, or give the players room to do detective work by dropping in little bits of history in that sense. So you don't need to give them necessarily a history of who constructed this place, but you can suggest that maybe the original occupants were these people. So I've done this before. Had a space that was originally occupied by one group of people, then taken over, invaded by another group of people, who then desecrated parts of the space. And so when the characters encounter this space, then what they're encountering is the evidence of another set of invaders who have done things to the space. And that would give them clues as to, there seems to have been a superior force that's been here in the past. How much time has passed since that happened? You can tell whether or not the corpses are desiccated or skeletal, or still rotting. And so that might give enough clues as to like how much time has passed. And so those type of historical context clues are valuable in placing this space. Okay, so that's historical context. So the last one is in relation to plot, which is basically to say sometimes what's important to communicate is that this space is the destination. So like you push open the double doors and they creak wide. Inside you see the remains of a once grand throne room. On the throne, seated there, in strangely lustrous robes, is a skeletal king. Something like that. It just simply the function of the room and its relation to the plot. It may also be the orc you had seen flee from battle headed this direction. When you push open the door, you find yourself confronted with a set of muddy footprints that track across the room towards something else. And so what gives significance to the room is not actually the room itself, it's the fact that it's connected to a certain plot point, which is that there is an enemy that you're chasing down who's passed through this area already. And that's actually the valuable thing. The fact that it's maybe it's a library, maybe it's something else, may not be the immediately present detail that the players are going to catch on to, or the characters are going to catch on to. So I think taken together, all these different things, you don't need to use them all in every description, but I think it's valuable to think, like, in the moment that you're describing things, what kind of information am I trying to impart? Is it more important to focus on its spatial relationship? Where is it connected to? Where is it going? Is it important to think about, like, what is the function of the space? Is it important to think about, like, what's happened here in the past? Or is it more important to think about, like, what just happened here that's related to their objectives, something that they're pursuing, something that they're seeking for, or is there some clue or information that they're looking for that would help them advance plot-wise in whatever adventure that they're on? So I think, like, if you keep these things in mind, then you're going to have descriptions that connect to the players and connect to the characters. the last thing you want is really a long-winded description that serves nothing other than to world build, but does not allow the players any opportunity to engage. Or having listened to it, they don't feel like they've advanced. They don't feel like they have opportunities to choose. They don't feel like they have information on which they can act. They feel that they've been listening to you rehearse a story, a novel, a world that you have built, in which they are spectators as opposed to active participants. And that's the last thing you want them to feel. You want them to feel that instead, everything that they're experiencing, seeing, through the eyes of their characters is about them. I mean, that's the weird, wonderful thing about it, is that they are in a world in which the world revolves around them because you're spinning it around them. It doesn't make them the most important things in the world. They may be more powerful forces at work, but for now, and for the moment of the game, what matters is what's happening to them. What matters when they step into that room is what does that room have to tell them about what it is and how it's connected to where they're trying to go. And so that's really what you want to get to. So that's today's discussion around description, especially room descriptions and context. And then we'll move on to some other subjects. We have a few more topics to get to in room descriptions, and then we'll move on to combat, which has been requested by a friend of mine. And we'll talk about how to make combat more lively, interesting, where the balance is between sort of description and over description. And how do we avoid it feeling too video gamey, where we're just like rehearsing and just relaying numbers and mathematical, tabulations. We're just adding up numbers and competing number-wise, versus like making sort of a scene that is captivating without dragging out the combat past the point of enjoyment. Okay, so we'll get back to that. We'll get there soon, but for now we're wrapping up room description. And thanks for staying in tune, and thanks for listening all the way through this. I hope you're enjoying these discussions about description and finding some inspiration for your own work as a DM or a GM, or in your own narrative storytelling, however you want to do it. But I think these things hopefully will be valuable to you. They have been valuable to me. And if you like this, please subscribe and check out more of these videos. And until next time, stay safe, stay well, and keep rolling dice.